Hey guys, Eclipse14 here. It's been a while since I last made a live recording of any sort whatsoever. So anyway, we're about to continue on to our collection, and this time we're going to enter the big mother lode that is the PlayStation collection, because my Sega collection is not collected up yet in order to do the videos. Now, I expected this was going to take quite a bit, so here's the situation. My entire PlayStation collection currently has 85 games, which I am not going to be doing that in a single episode. Not only is that going to take forever, but it's just gonna be a whole thing, and it's just editing is gonna suck. So what I've decided to do is split the whole thing into 5 parts, consisting of 17 games each. So we're going to start off with the discs only and some of the lesser games, and work our way up from there, because the last episode is definitely going to get some really spiky stuff. So with that said, I think we're going to go ahead and just quickly get into this. The first game in this treasure trove is Mortal Kombat Trilogy, which, as it states, is the first 3 Mortal Kombat games that was originally on, I'd say, the Super Nintendo at the very least. I don't know if the Sega consoles did the, actually, yeah, they did, on the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo. All 3 of them were combined to make the Mortal Kombat Trilogy, which was ported onto some 5th generation systems, including the PlayStation. Now, I should note that this is the Greatest Hits Edition disc. I have tried my hardest to completely clean out my entire Greatest Hits collection, and upon getting this is actually bought off in an auction lot, which is why I still have this disc. I'm actually trying to find the original release, which was, I think this was one of the long box games. So I'm definitely looking for that while I get the chance, but all I know is the Mortal Kombat games are very fun, and I definitely really enjoyed them. But yeah, I have just the disc alone. I'm looking for a complete copy, and I'm hoping to get it at some point in time, but for right now, this is what I've got to start off. Now, usually I don't start off with the expensive ones really off the bat, but this one's pretty much a wham episode at the start because I only own the disc of this game. And that game is Thunder Force 5 Perfect System. Now, there are 6 Thunder Force games in total in the form of Thunder Force to Thunder Force 6. The first one was only available on a certain Japanese computer. I don't remember the name off the top of my head right now. The second, third, and fourth games were on the Genesis, the fifth was on the Saturn, and the sixth was on the PS2. For Thunder Force 5's case, we got one, all but 1 and 6, but the fifth game was available on the PlayStation for us. Now, this Spaz logo is actually the label that Working Designs was using, so this was one of the Working Designs games. I ended up buying this off for $5, and since then, this game has gotten very expensive. I recall complete copies selling for over $100, like a lot of that company's games is going for right now. So I'm definitely glad I got this disc when I did, because this isn't cheap either. This is actually the only disc I've ever seen of this game too, so I do have some writing on it, which is unfortunate, but what can be done. This is actually a very excellent game. I definitely really enjoy this one. Um, that's really all I have to really say about it, because I've played the Thunder Force games a little bit, but I've never actually been able to finish them because shoot 'em ups are a pain in the neck as it is. At some point, I will try to complete this game, but for right now, I'm just really glad I actually have the disc itself. I would like to play it soon, but I might do that at some point. We'll get to that at some point in time, just not now. Next up is Spyro the Dragon, which is one of the first PlayStation games that I definitely recall playing because my sister actually had a case full of PlayStation and PlayStation 2 discs. There was just 10, it was 10 slots in total, which I actually still own to this day because she gave me it when I got my PS2. This is the case that it came in. Definitely still have it to this day. There's a few discs in there now, 2 on the PlayStation, which was the last game I showed, and this game, as well as 2 Sega Saturn discs that I will get to when I make that episode. That's all that's in there right now. But this is a game that I've played I've beaten this game a number of times, but twice have I 100% completed it. And this is one of those games where I would like to actually play it on the channel once I get the chance to actually at least record it on the TV, or at the very least have an emulator ready so I could play it on the computer. But as it sits right now, I'm having some difficulty with that, and I'm hoping that gets resolved pretty soon because I would like to play this game again. As well as the entire trilogy, because I have actually completed the entire trilogy, uh, in terms of gameplay. So, speaking of that, let's actually go ahead and cover the rest of the Spyro games, shall we? And with this instance, we go to our first case game of the entire section, which is Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage. Now, this was actually the last of the three Spyro games that I had to play on the PlayStation, and as you can tell here, this has a foil cover, whereas the Greatest Hits version does not have such a case, and I think some Black Label games don't have the feature either, so I got lucky in finding a foil cover. This one, it's got everything, and I pretty much took a guide in order to try to get the whole thing 100% completed, because I wanted to do that after I completed Year of the Dragon, which is the next game I'm going to show. And other than that, I really don't have a whole lot to say. It's just I remember how the game was formatted basically from the first and third game because I played them both at the same time. And unfortunately, that's all I've got to say about the second game. And speaking of the third Spyro game, ta-da! Also got a Black Label version of Year of the Dragon. Now, in this particular instance, I actually owned a Greatest Hits version of the game for a little bit of time, then eventually sold the disc alone, because that's what I had, and then eventually I found this copy. What I do know is that there is a hologram cover that this game has, but unfortunately I never found that copy, and I'm still looking for that little cover to this very day. But what I will say is that I did eventually complete this whole thing 100% with everything that was possibly available. And I will say the entire trilogy is fantastic in its own right, and I do hope to play for the channel at some point. I want to start with the first game, then go to the second game, then go to the third game. But as it sits, I'm just having technical problems, but hopefully I'll get them resolved soon, and we'll get the whole trilogy covered. And with that, that's really all I have to say about the Spyro games. They're excellent platformers in their own right. Next up is one of the last discs I've got. There's one more coming up, but that's part of a series as well, and that is Rayman. Oh, crap. There we go. Rayman. This was actually a launch title for the PlayStation, as I recall, and this is a greatest hits disc. I actually have the manual for this one. I ended up buying this thing in an auction lot, along with Mortal Kombat Trilogy and a couple other games. So I'm actually looking for a complete Black Label copy of this game, but Rayman is actually quite expensive, if I remember it right. Even a complete one of these is like 60 bucks or something like that, just on PlayStation. This thing was also available on the Saturn and the Jaguar, which are even more expensive and outrageous. So it is going to be kind of a troublesome pain to actually find that, so I may actually keep this in the manual until I find a copy. What I do know about this game is that it is insanely difficult because no one playtested the sucker, but it doesn't escape the fact that it was still a very good game in its own right. It's just a pain in the frickin' neck. It's just difficult. And I like difficult games, so maybe at some point I will get the chance to play this. I actually tested this on a new PS2 I bought, and so far it works fine, but I haven't gotten much else past that point. But yeah, I do own the game. Can't wait to play it, but I do want a Black Label copy at some point. Next game is a game called Rallycross 2, which is it's an okay little racing game. I actually found this game off of a demo disc I had a while back that I eventually finally got rid of. And this is one of the very few games that's actually fairly dirt cheap that is actually quite fun and I still own. This thing is like, I don't know, 10 bucks maximum maybe. It's a game that I definitely really liked because it was just fun to play around, and the vibration effects was always active, which was kind of a neat thing to have. And there was also a fairly decent track editor, but there were a couple issues that I had with it in the form of the fact that there was only 90-degree turns when it came to turns, as well as a few other things that made it a little bit off. But overall, it still seemed like a pretty decent game, and definitely one I would give a try. Never really completed the entire thing, just played around when I had nothing else to do. So yeah, Rallycross 2 for PlayStation. Next up is Bomberman Party Edition, which in this instance, it's actually, when it comes to single player mode, that it's basically a remake of the very first Bomberman game that was out on NES. As the multiplayer version, on the other hand, you could play up to 5 different players, and it was still the classic Bomberman setup, which something irked me a little bit because I wasn't really used to that format. I was more used to Bomberman 64 format, which is still my favorite Bomberman game in terms of that. But I got it because I actually like the series in general, and I just wanted to see what this was like. That's really all I have to say about it because there's not much else to really say about it. Just the single player game's a remake of the original NES game, and not sure if it was an arcade at that point at the top of my head, but I definitely know it was on NES because I played that version. And then there's also the multiplayer version, which is just 5 men going at it, and that's really all that there is to say about it. I wish I could say more, but what needs explained? It's Bomberman. You blow yourself up. Well, not really, but you blow everyone else up too. Next is Lemmings and Oh No More Lemmings. Now, this was actually a fairly tough game to find, but it's still a fairly cheap game. I think the max is like 20-25 bucks, and that's pushing it. Now, Lemmings is actually a game that was originally released on the PC in the early 90s that got ported onto a number of systems. It was on the NES, the SNES, and I think the Sega Genesis and a number of other consoles. Odo More Lemmings was actually, at the time that this game was released, a very recent update of the game, which was actually meant to be a much harder version of the original Lemmings. It was already out on the PC just a few months before this game was released, and this combines the two. The whole goal is basically you have a bunch of lemmings, and you make a number of them do as many jobs as they need to in order to get everyone through the door to continue to the next level. I have played this a little bit, but it's been a long time since I last really played it. It's just been sitting in the collection. Just that's all it is just collecting dust. I do know that it was an interesting game in its own right, but it was a fairly difficult game for me to get a handle on, so I kind of stopped playing it for that reason. Either way, I know a lot. I know there were some that did like the first game, and the second game, Oh No More Lemmings, gives a very serious challenge in its own right. So if you liked Lemmings, try to look out for this one. It really tests you. Next game on the list is a game called Soul Blade. Now, Soul Blade is actually the precursor to a series known as Soul Calibur, which I'm pretty sure a number of you are probably familiar with. Soul Blade is actually the very first game in the series, which takes place before everything else, actually. Now, in this particular instance, I wasn't really familiar with. I was familiar with the Soul Calibur games, but I never actually played them. So, playing this one, I didn't really recognize that it was a precursor to Soul Calibur until later. I did play through a good amount of the game. There were a couple missions that gave me some problems, and eventually I just stopped playing it altogether because it's a fighting game, and fighting games don't really take very long for me anyway. But it is very nice to see that I actually have the precursor to the whole thing, and a Black Label one to boot. So it is very nice to have. I actually did own a Greatest Hits version of this game at some point, and then I eventually sold it once I found a Black Label copy, and I still own it today. So it is very nice that I own the game, and a pretty good precursor to everything else. And just like Soul Blade, this series actually started on the PlayStation and grew to its own little famous series in time, and that was Dynasty Warriors. Now, unlike the modern games today, Dynasty Warriors started out pretty much more simply. More or less like a carbon copy of Soul Blade. It was literally a 2D styled fighter. It was 3D. 2D styled fighting in a 3D format. And of course, you had weapons and everything. And the whole idea was basically 3rd century China instead of 15th century Europe. That was the case that was becoming Soul Calibur. Dynasty Warriors eventually changed itself over time, especially with the third game moving on, and it became a little more of its own little thing. But at the end, this is actually more or less a carbon copy of Soul Blade, which is actually how the series came out. I'm not really sure how many people actually played the very first game. I've played it. It's okay. Does pretty well for its job. But I think we all know who the real winner was, and it's a good thing that Dynasty Warriors moved on instead of just being a carbon copy. And that's really all I got to say about it. And next up, I finally get to talk about what should have been the PlayStation mascot, Crash Bandicoot. Now, getting a black label one of these was a pain in the freaking neck. This, nowadays, it's especially the case because finding a black label is an absolute mess. I have had the green label copy of this game at one point in time, and I'm going to cheat a little bit. I lied a little bit. I actually own 86 PlayStation games, but the problem is the 86th game is just the greatest hits version of Crash Bandicoot with the greatest hits manual, so that's why I said 85 instead of 86, because it's a freaking duplicate that I need to sell. Anyway, I have played this game start to finish, and I have managed to 100% complete it over time. The problem with my black label copy, however, is that the manual is disconnected from its staples. So the top layer here is disconnected from the actual manual and makes it an absolute pain in the ass to actually get that thing out. So that's the only issue with this copy, but I can't have any qualms because finding a black label copy is not only difficult, but also tremendously more expensive than the greatest hits copy. So I am really glad I found this for what I did. I paid, I think, 25 bucks for this one. Not too bad at all for a black label copy of Crash Bandicoot. And of course, we're talking Crash, so we got a trilogy in its own right in the form of Crash Bandicoot 2, Cortex Strikes Back being the second game. Now, as you see here, I have a hologram cover, which was actually what I was talking about in Spyro the Dragon. Let me go ahead and just pull this out here. Most Black Label copies, if I recall correctly, do not actually have the hologram. So yeah, that's the actual manual itself, and this is the hologram cover, which is pretty cool in its own little right. That's really all it is, though. So it is nice to have that. I found this pretty quickly, and I snagged that pretty quickly. This was actually the first of the trilogy where I actually picked up the Black Label version, and I got lucky just getting the hologram of it. I did play this game all the way from start to finish once again, 100%ed it later on, and the rest is the rest, pretty much. I actually had a little bit of fun with this game, definitely a little bit more than the original game in its own right. And that's all I've got to say about that one. And of course, we conclude the original PlayStation trilogy with Crash Bandicoot Warped. Again, we have a lenticular cover, and not lenticular, maybe it is called that, but it's a hologram in my instance. This one actually took longer to find in this instance, because I recall it existing, but I missed the chance to get it the first time. I think it was like 35 bucks at the time, though, which was absolutely outrageous now that I look back at it. But I ended up finding it at a flea market later for 15, and I definitely took it when I did. So now I actually own a complete Black Label set. This one I did complete as well, up to 105%, and is actually an instance where I do want to... The Crash Bandicoot series is an excellent series of platformers in its own right, and I definitely also want to play them on the PlayStation alongside Spyro the Dragon. But again, with the technical difficulties, I just haven't been able to do so. I got quite fairly lucky with Crash Bandicoot, so there's not much else to say. It's just both of them are excellent platformers, and both of them, if they had not gone multi-platform on the 6th generation, could have become mascots for the PlayStation in their own right. Unfortunately, they multied, and the rest is history. Having some coloring problems right now, but it looks like I can't be able to fix them at this point. I'm only 3 games left before I finish this episode, so I'm not going to worry about it. Anyway, the last game I have to show is also the last game of the Crash section, as well as the last game I have that's without its case, and that is Crash Team Racing. Now, I remember this was the best-selling game that was not owned by Nintendo in some way, shape, or form, in the form of the Mario Kart series in that regard. But I do remember Crash Nitro Kart, which was like a newer, I think it was like a sequel to this game or something like that. but I never actually played the original Crash Team Racing until I got this game off the same auction lot I picked up all my other disc-only PlayStation games. I also got the manual with it too, which is a black label one. I wish I had the case for this one, and I've only tried this out long enough to make sure that the thing was working and everything, and I played through it a little bit before my PS2 started to get a little bit weird, and that's when I stopped playing it, so I haven't really touched the game since then. This is one of those games that I would like to play at the fullest at some point in time, but with my PS2 kind of as it is, I don't know what is the issue with it. It runs a lot harder than usual, I think. But as it sits right now, I've got, I've played through a little bit of it, and I'm really hoping that I can play it again at some point in time. So, Crash Team Racing for PlayStation. The next game I have features our first big jewel case, which is a multi-disc jewel case. In this case, we have 4 discs that make up the entire game, and that game is Fear Effect. Now, I've heard about Fear Effect and Fear Effect 2, but I never actually played the games. And unfortunately, I never really got around to actually playing this one either. I just had it in the collection, just collecting dust. I've played it a little bit. I know kind of what the whole game is like. It's a bunch of mercenaries trying to go after somebody. And in this particular instance, I never actually just managed to get around to playing the game. I know I've heard it was actually a really good duo, but I just never got around to it. So I don't have a whole lot to say about it, unfortunately. So there's disc 1, there's the manual, and behind that is also disc 2. So that's how that shebang goes. Disc 3, on the other hand, disc 4 run just as fine. Disc 3 was popped out of its case earlier, so that this thing is a little bit weak in the fingers. I see where the problem is, but don't know if I can get it changed sooner or later. But all I know is I have a complete game. Hopefully I'll find the second game, but I do want to play the first game at some point in time. I've never got around to it, and it's just been sitting around collecting dust. I wish I had more to say about it, but someone who hasn't played very much isn't going to say much. And the last game will round off our first 17 games for this episode. And when it comes down to the PlayStation, you can't really talk about the original PlayStation without mentioning the excellent Metal Gear Solid. Now, I remember originally playing this game off of a demo disc that included Rallycross 2 and another game we'll get to later in a different episode. I played through that mostly, and I just had a lot of fun with that first level, just playing around and all that stuff. But I actually mostly played this version of the game through just the demo. I got this game, but I held off on it for a reason, and until I got the Twin Snakes, I just didn't touch it. The real reason why is because of condition reasons. I got really lucky with this particular copy for only 18 bucks. And and why I say only is because the condition of the discs, I'm very wary of taking them out. They are absolutely pristine. Disc 2, in this case, looking at the back of it, looks like it was never ever touched. So, and disc 1, being disc 1, has a slight bit of wear, but it's so little, it's unbelievable. This is a case of a game that really honestly should have been left in the shrink wrap if it was never going to be used. If that was the case, the thing would be like 150 bucks or something like that. I think that's how much they would go for brand new. Black label. But yeah, the real reason I never actually played the PlayStation version of Metal Gear Solid was not because I didn't want to play it, it was actually because I was trying to keep the condition in set. So I only played the first game through the Twin Snakes port that was on the GameCube collection, if you want to check that out. So I can't really say a whole lot about this one because it's pretty much already covered on the Twin Snakes episode, on the GameCube collection. So that's really all I got to say. So yeah, I mostly have this game out of condition reasons. So it's unbelievable that I found it so pristine. And that's about it. The first 17 games are down. I still have a crap load of PlayStation games to cover, but I thought of doing a 5-part thing because I was thinking originally 4 episodes, but I think that would have taken too long anyway. So I did 5, and so far it works out in about the time frame that I was really wishing to be. So, I guess when it comes down to it, I guess we'll go ahead and I'll just say stay tuned for part 2, I guess. We'll be going into some of the other obscurities and that are pretty much well known, and then we'll start getting into some of the rare stuff as I go deeper into the second episode and beyond. So, with that all said, got this done in over 2 days. We'll see what I can do with the rest of the collection over time, and we'll see what happens. That's all I can really say. So, with that all said, thank you for watching. Hope you guys can stay tuned for part 2, and I will see you all then.